Stars. The action kicks off this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Listen to every call and every game of your school all season long for free on TuneIn. Just search college to listen today.
Cook got a block. Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
NFL fans, hear every live game on TuneIn Premium.
The snap, the give, Jones up the middle, runs it back. He's to the 10, to the 5, to the end zone, touchdown.
This Thursday, hear the home and away call as the Pittsburgh Steelers visit the Cleveland Browns at 8:20 p.m. Eastern.
Getting pressure again, rolls to his right. He's going to run with it. He's a 5. He got it.
At home or on the go, hear the home and away call of every NFL game this season on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
Start hearing more of what you want.
Upgrade to TuneIn Premium and get over 45 commercial-free music stations, live commercial-free news, and every live NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL game. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
What if, instead of browsing the World Wide Web, we were all browsing GopherNet?
Gopher is easy to navigate and easy to browse.
Because in the early 90s,
Gopher was taking off faster.
Until they made one crucial mistake.
At that point, Gopher traffic on the internet dropped off.
Find out why open source won the battle for the internet next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR. You can subscribe to the TED Radio Hour on TuneIn.
Listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, and welcome everybody to this very special edition of Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Jason Kelly, downtown Manhattan here at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. And Alice Greenwald, you run this whole thing here.
With a cast of thousands.
With a cast of thousands. Fair enough. And Frank Bisignano, President and COO of Fiserv, also a board member here at 9/11. Alice, this is a big day. The second year you've done this. Tell us the purpose.
Well, the purpose of the Summit on Security is to bring together individuals across sectors, so from the private side, the public side, government, corporate, so that there can be a joint conversation about preparedness, the nature of the threats, how you recover from events. And really, from our point of view, it's a perfect example of the continuing impact of 9/11, the things that we have to pay attention to as a result of the world we now live in.
And so what has really stood out to you today? The second year you're doing this, we were talking a little bit about this before we came on air. What's really jumped out at you theme-wise this year?
So the theme has been primarily about cybersecurity, which is obviously a threat at every level of our lives. But what has struck me most is that the conversation has bridged both the cognitive, practical, what do you do, how do you deal with it, what are the ways you know you've got a problem, who do you partner with, but also the heart. So it's been head and heart. And there's been a lot of conversation today, including Frank kicking it off this morning, that has been about the motivation for this awareness of the need for security coming out of personal 9/11 experiences.
Well, and Frank, pick up on that because you kicked it off so beautifully this morning on a very personal note, your own remembrances of 9/11, but also talking about everything that's happened in between and the work that you're doing now, both professionally in your day job as well as your work here. Help set the tone in that regard for us.
Well, I think it's about preparedness, and I think it's about partnership. If you were in the sacred place on 9/12 in that year, you have seen partnership at its highest possible level. People all across America coming together to bond. And when you take that thought and say we can protect ourselves by sharing, by partnering, we will be much better prepared. And that means government, that means businesses, that's every form of law enforcement and sharing, because protection is the number one thing for us to work on, and preparedness in the event of any disaster. Right. And I think it was always on everyone's mind, but now it's completely in the forefront, and the partnerships are very high and very strong.
Well, and it's interesting, Frank, too, because it feels like a lot of that sharing has been demonstrated in the financial services industry. You've been long time in that business. It's a very competitive business. We all know that. And yet, financial services has been able to share around this in a way that maybe is unexpected. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think everybody recognized that the greater good is the most important thing. It was our financial markets, our stock market that wasn't operating during that disaster, and that's good for no one except the bad guys. And we all united to bring it together to get it back up and running, and everybody understands help each other. When we were walking on those streets, Greenwich Street, everyone was created equal and everyone believed that they had to help each other. And today in Lower Manhattan, when you come to this fabulous, fabulous sacred place, the 9/11 Memorial Museum, all you see is teamwork, partnership, and people caring for each other.
And Alice, it was interesting, Admiral Mullen, we're going to hear from him a little bit later on in the show. He was here in part to help unveil a new exhibit that's going to be open to the public this weekend about the hunt for bin Laden, ultimately successful after many, many years. Tell us a little bit about that exhibit.
Absolutely, and thanks for asking. Revealed is opening on Friday, November 15th. It's called Revealed, The Hunt for Bin Laden. And it tells a story we all think we know. We all know the ending of the story. We know where it leads. What we don't know is how we got there. And this is really a phenomenal telling of the work it took, the coordination across law enforcement, military, intelligence agencies, domestic and international. It was a hugely coordinated effort that went longer than a decade, so before 9/11 until May 2011. And that level of coordination, what it took, and as you go through this exhibit, it unfolds like a mystery. Even though you know where it will lead, you are riveted because each moment is peeling away the layers of trying to find this man, what the leads were. Some of the leads end nowhere, and some of the leads actually led to a bottom line.
Right. Well, and as Alice says, Frank, so timely, given the capture of al-Baghdadi as well. Most recently, it reminds us the world is not a safe place in many ways. And I wonder, how do you think about that from your business perspective? Because you have responsibility for so many transactions, so much money moving through the system. How do you think about it today?
Well, most of my career I worried about this. And it's top of mind. It's top of mind for every CEO, for every senior executive, protecting your people, protecting the assets of your clients, protecting your shareholders' value. And so it is the number one item. And you make sure your defense is as strong as humanly possible. And it's never good enough. Every day you come in and say never good enough. And you can never feel safe enough. So it's a constant drumbeat. It's you build an organization around it. You make sure you have great organizational awareness, and then connectivity of organizations matter. Any piece of data and information that may seem trivial may actually protect you very, very much. And having all partners work together is critically important.
So speaking of connectivity, we are Bloomberg. After all, the last time we talked, you had not done the big deal. I believe that you have now done. How's that going?
It's going great.
Yeah.
It's going great. We have an unbelievable company. Fiserv is alive and well and strong. Fiserv before First Data was this great brand and great economic machine. First Data had a lot of fabulous assets in it. We were fortunate that we could put them together and build what we think is the best fintech in the world.
Well, Alice, it's a beautiful day here in Lower Manhattan. What's the biggest priority for you going forward?
The biggest priority is thinking about the next generation. We are coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, hard as that is to believe.
Amazing.
And 20 years is a generation, conventionally speaking. And already we are seeing people who are in college with no memory of 9/11, young professionals coming out of law enforcement training from the academies, no memory of that day. And yet they are moving into careers like security, moving into careers in the financial industry. And we believe that the world that they are inheriting has been conditioned by the events and repercussions of this event. So we are here to help them connect those dots, and I think that's going to be our most important purpose going forward.
Alice Greenwald, Frank Bisignano, thank you so much. We should also mention, of course, that Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, also serves as the chairman of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. Thank you both so much. Going to send it to Bob Mood now. He has got your world and national headlines. Hi, Bob.
Jason, the House Intelligence Committee continues its extraordinary public hearings on whether the 45th President of the United States should be removed from office. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has the latest for us live from Capitol Hill.
Bob, the lawyer for committee Democrats, Dan Goldman, asked Deputy Assistant Secretary of State George Kent about President Trump's allegations that Vice President Joe Biden sought to quash a Ukrainian probe into the gas company that recruited his son Hunter for its board of directors.
To your knowledge, is there any factual basis to support those allegations?
None whatsoever.
When Vice President Biden acted in Ukraine, did he act in accordance with official U.S. policy?
He did.
To your knowledge, is there any factual basis that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election?
To my knowledge, there is no factual basis, no.
The diplomats depicted Ukraine as a young democracy struggling to ally itself with the West against its bullying neighbor, Russia. On Capitol Hill, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio. Bob.
Thank you, Irv. He says he's not watching, but it didn't take much for President Trump to unload his disdain when reporters asked about the impeachment hearing during an Oval Office photo op today.
I'm too busy to watch it. It's a witch hunt. It's a hoax. I'm too busy to watch it. So I'm sure I'll get a report. There's nothing. I have not been briefed. No. There's nothing there. I see they're using lawyers that are television lawyers. They took some guys off television. You know, I'm not surprised to see it because Schiff can't do his own questions.
Trump spoke as he was sitting down with Turkish President Erdogan at the White House amid serious strains in the relationship between the two NATO nations. Trump and Erdogan set to hold a joint news conference in the coming hour. We'll bring it to you live. Global News, I'm Bob Moon.
Why has J.D. Power ranked Commonwealth Financial Network #1 in independent advisor satisfaction among financial investment firms for the 6th straight time? We think it comes down to one thing: you. Because it's your input and feedback that keeps us focused on what's most important to you and your clients and continually pushes us to be the best we can be. Maybe that's why we receive top marks in every category of the J.D. Power 2019 Advisor Satisfaction Survey. They named us #1 in client support, #1 in firm leadership, #1 in operational support, #1 in compensation, #1 in professional development support, and #1 in technology support. Ready to partner with the best? Call Commonwealth at 866-462-3638 or visit commonwealth.com and feel the power. Member FINRA SIPC, a registered investment advisor. For 2019 J.D. Power Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Startups and research universities like New Jersey Institute of Technology are fueling the innovation economy. And few people are better positioned to see what's on the horizon in New Jersey than physicist and state representative Andrew Zwicker.
How technology is transforming our financial sector is revolutionary, and so much of that is in New Jersey. We are innovators when it comes to agriculture, and there is opportunity now for great transformation in how are we going to grow food in an ever-growing population, and how do we turn urban centers into agricultural centers. Autonomous vehicles is another one where we have some of the world's leading experts, and how this will transform how those who are either elderly or are visually impaired or mobilely impaired can start to use autonomous vehicles to transform their lives and have access to transportation they could have never had before.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu/research.
Are you?
Next. Nah. Nope. Boring. If you skip through loads of your TV channels, why are you paying loads of money for them? With TalkTalk TV and Faster Fibre, you can access the nation's favourite TV shows, a world of films and sport, live and on demand, all for £25.95 a month for 18 months. And if you're quick, you'll even get a year of Amazon Prime on us. Search TalkTalk TV. TalkTalk. For everyone. Offer ends 5th of December, subject to availability. T's and C's apply.
If you're planning on driving this weekend, expect delays on the A406 North Circular Road. There will be road closures between Edmonton and Tottenham from 10 p.m. on Friday the 15th of November to 5 a.m. on Monday the 18th of November. while we carry out essential maintenance and repairs. All roads in the surrounding area will be extremely busy, so please allow more time for your journey and expect delays in the area. Plan ahead and check alternative routes at tfl.gov.uk. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Far wing, elevates, triple bucket.
The war of the crowd. The shot clock ticks down. Will the ball go in? The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. And the replays just don't cut
the
it.
Sideline, the man fleet for three.
TuneIn Premium brings you every minute of the NBA season streaming live, so you can be there when it matters most. Hear it now, hear it live on TuneIn.
Fake in the lane, turnaround jumper from 8 feet is good on
Search
the right block.
NBA Today to start listening.
Cook got a block. Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
NFL fans, hear every live game on TuneIn Premium.
The snap, again, Jones up the middle, runs it back. He's to the 10, to the 5, to the end zone, touchdown.
This Thursday, hear the home and away call as the Pittsburgh Steelers visit the Cleveland Browns at 8:20 p.m. Eastern.
Getting pressure again, rolls to his right. Fakes, he's going to run with it. He's a 5. Touchdown.
At home or on the go, hear the home and away call of every NFL game this season on TuneIn Premium. Upgrade today.
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
What if, instead of browsing the World Wide Web, we were all browsing GopherNet?
Gopher is easy to navigate and easy to browse.
Because in the early 90s,
Gopher was taking off faster.
Until they made one crucial mistake.
At that point, Gopher traffic on the internet dropped off.
Find out why open source won the battle for the internet next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR. You can subscribe to the TED Radio Hour on TuneIn.
Are you curious what others are listening to on TuneIn? Head to the trending section under Browse to see the most popular stations and podcasts among TuneIn listeners right now. Check it out. You might just discover something new for yourself.
This is the TuneIn Newsreel.
Stocks have been modestly lower with no apparent impact from the impeachment hearings or remarks from Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell on the economy. Powell is answering questions from Congress. The Fed chair says he does not support lowering interest rates again in December, though the Fed will respond if there are reports indicating the economy is weakening. Shah Gilani of Money Map Press says investors are not expecting another cut next month.
Hear breaking news as it happens with live around-the-clock coverage from Fox News on TuneIn.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Right now we have the equity market down from session highs on a report of a snag in trade talks between the U.S. and China. Dow Jones was reporting earlier, China is leery of putting a numerical commitment on an agreement to buy more U.S. agricultural goods. Earlier, President Trump was saying that China has agreed to buy up to $50 billion worth of U.S. farm products annually. Right now, the Dow holding on to a gain of 0.3%, although the S&P right now with a slim gain, less than 0.1%, and the NASDAQ composite down from a record high by 0.1%. Earlier, Fed Chair Jay Powell said the current stance of monetary policy is likely to be sufficient, provided the economy stays on track. We've got a 10-year Treasury now yielding 1.87%. Let's get back to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Security Summit in Bloomberg's Jason Kelly.
Doug, thank you so much. I am Jason Kelly in downtown Manhattan. It's been a really interesting and powerful day here at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. Earlier in the day, I got to catch up with Jen Easterly. She's managing director over at Morgan Stanley, worked in Army intelligence for many years on the NSA, in the White House. She's a graduate of West Point, a former instructor there. And she talked about her job on Wall Street and what she's doing, encountering all sorts of new threats. Take a listen.
Obviously, looking at the threat landscape now, we still have the physical threats from groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but now dealing with significant cyber threats from nation states, from organized criminal group threats, from the weaponization of data for things like disinformation that really corrodes our trust in people and institutions. And so things like that we have to worry about, both for attacks against critical infrastructure, but also attacks against things like reputation are hugely important.
Right, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because at the core of that conversation, it feels like increasingly the conversations that we're having are much more holistic and focus on people and not just the bits and bytes and the really wonky technical stuff that you understand and I don't. Yeah. But I do understand the concept of bad actors. And so how do you combat that in some way?
You know, I often say that cybersecurity is not about computers and it's not about code. It's about people. And frankly, what I think we really need to worry about, obviously, you know, there are significant cyber threats, and so we've done a lot across the whole banking sector to protect our assets and our clients. But at the end of the day, it's attacks against what I think is our most critical infrastructure, our cognitive infrastructure, the way that we make good decisions and our judgment. And that's being impacted by a lot of these disinformation and malinformation campaigns through the weaponization of data. So you're right. I think we need to look at the threat landscape very holistically, from the physical threats to the cyber threats to the threats against facts, frankly.
Well, and it sounds like one of the ways you combat that is with better people in some ways and training them in a different way. Tell me about that.
Human capital is really critical here. You know, you need people, you need process, you need technology to be successful in the cybersecurity world, but I think talent is the most important. You know, researchers estimate that by the year 2021, there will be 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs around the world, and you could argue we're already in -% unemployment, so more jobs out there than people. So there's much we have to do to educate, you know, clearly our employees and our clients about the threats that are out there in cyberspace. But I really think we need to look at this problem much more comprehensively. We have to start with the youngest among us. One of the things that I've been working on is part of a new nonprofit called Cyber Nation. And the idea is to bring together the world's cyber and technology experts with the world's greatest storytellers to demystify cyber. So to inspire, to inform, to educate from K through Gray, from your digital natives to your digital immigrants, because we all need to understand what's the technology, what are the threats, are there laws in cyberspace, is there privacy online, and then ultimately what it means to be a good digital citizen.
When you think about your work in the financial services world, as you said, you came out of the public sector working in the Army, you worked in the White House, you worked in the NSA. Part of what you are now faced with is cybersecurity when it comes to one of the fundamental building blocks of our society, which is money. And it does feel like banks and financial institutions have invested heavily here. What are you seeing now? Because you are charged largely with looking around the corner.
I see my mission now as really an extension of what I've done through most of my career in national security, which is really defending our economic security. I mean, given that a big bank is so fundamental to national security. So I think you're right. I mean, the banking sector is ahead of this problem, and we had to be, because we were attacked pretty significantly in the 2012, 2013, 2014 time frame, where a group known as the Al-Qassam cyber fighters, later identified with the Iranian government, were doing what was called distributed denial of service attacks, essentially launching massive data websites so that people couldn't get to them. And it caused a panic. It was, for the first time, it illuminated the vulnerability of our critical financial infrastructure. But off the back of that, banking really got ahead of this and put in the right programs, the right processes, the right technologies, and started really investing in that talent so that we could strengthen the sector. And some of the things that we've done to come together, very importantly, to share information. I was incredibly encouraged to come from the White House to the banking, to the financial sector, to see how much sharing there is, both within the financial sector. So, you know, big banks are super competitive about talent and super competitive about business. They're not competitive about sharing information that's going to keep the sector safe. And there's also good sharing between the government as well as the private sector, and that will continue to grow and strengthen, hopefully, in the coming years.
And so, you talked about that sort of K through gray. I love that phraseology. But when you think about your own business and the talent gap there, how do you fill that?
So we have been successful so far in recruiting the folks that we've needed for the Fusion Center, but we've reached pretty far afield. So we, of course, had great talent within Morgan Stanley from an engineering standpoint that we brought in to help build the center, but we've gone out to academia, we've gone to the military, we've gone to the intelligence community, some of the other banks, some vendors. We have really built sort of a village, because it does take a village to be successful in cybersecurity, and it's not just about coders or developers or programmers. You do definitely need that skill, but you also need analysts who can help you understand the very complex and dynamic cyber threat environment. You need incident responders who understand how to reverse engineer malware. You need crisis managers who can deal with a major threat or a major vulnerability. So it's really building this fabric of talent that's brought in from places all around the world, because we're in New York, we're in Baltimore, we're in Glasgow, we're in Singapore, so we're truly global. And so it's tapping into a global talent market. And then, my biggest challenge has not been recruiting necessarily, but it's retention. Because in a world where there are so many opportunities for cyber talent, you have to really cultivate an environment that enables you to retain that talent. And, you need an environment of psychological safety, frankly, where people can bring their imagination, they feel like they're actively listened to, where they can bring great ideas to the table. And that, I think, is the key to retaining your best and brightest.
And that is Jen Easterly. She is managing director over at Morgan Stanley, looking after all of their cybersecurity, coming out of the government to do that job. Over the course of her career, she worked not only for Condoleezza Rice during the George W. Bush administration, she worked for Susan Rice under the Obama administration. She worked in the NSA. She was an Army intelligence officer, deployed all sorts of places overseas. She has seen the threat up close and personal. That conversation, talking about sort of looking around the corner, but also having the right people to do it, has really been a key theme here at the 9/11 Memorial Museum and Summit on Security, Just a quick headline, crossing the Bloomberg: Disney surpassing its intraday record. Those streaming subscriber gains driving that stock up. It's currently up better than 6.5%. We'll get into that a little bit later on. Much more to come, including Kathleen Hayes and her interview with Mary Daly, president of the San Francisco Fed. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week right here on Bloomberg Radio.
If you're planning on driving this weekend, expect delays on the A406 North Circular Road. There'll be road closures between Edmonton and Tottenham from 10 p.m. on Friday the 15th of November to 5 a.m. on Monday the 18th of November, while we carry out essential maintenance and repairs. All roads in the surrounding area will be extremely busy, so please allow more time for your journey and expect delays in the area. Plan ahead and check alternative routes at tfl.gov.uk. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Far wing, elevates, triple bucket.
The roar of the crowd. The shot clock ticks down. Will the ball go in? The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. And the replays just don't cut
the
it.
sideline, the Van Fleet for three.
TuneIn Premium brings you every minute of the NBA season streaming live, so you can be there when it matters most. Hear it now, hear it live on TuneIn.
Fake in the lane, turnaround jumper from 8 feet is good on
Search
the right.
NBA Today to start listening.
Some days life can get in the way of catching up on the news that moves your world. TuneIn is here to help. With live 24/7 coverage from CNN wherever you go on the TuneIn app, you can always find a slice of your schedule, however long, to check in on the biggest stories of the day.
Hell hath no fury. The president's counselor went on a rampage on a taped phone call with Washington Examiner reporter.
Search CNN on TuneIn to get the live news when it matters most.
College football is live on TuneIn. Listen for free to games from more than 140 schools all season long.
To the 10, all the way to the checkerboard. Somebody stays on his feet and scores. Touchdown.
The top of the Big 12 is at stake. Reigning champion Oklahoma travels to Waco, Texas to take on the surprising undefeated Baylor Bears. The action kicks off this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Listen to every call and every game of your school all season long for free on TuneIn. Just search college to listen today.
Are you curious what others are listening to on TuneIn? Head to the trending section under Browse to see the most popular stations and podcasts among TuneIn listeners right now. Check it out. You might just discover something new for yourself.
Hey NFL fans, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you have unlimited access to every team and every game in the league. Listen live as it happens or on demand. Anytime, anywhere. All season long. Search NFL today.
What if, instead of browsing the World Wide Web, we were all browsing GopherNet?
Gopher is easy to navigate and easy to browse.
Because in the early 90s,
Gopher was taking off faster.
Until they made one crucial mistake.
At that point, Gopher traffic on the internet dropped off.
Find out why open source won the battle for the internet next time on the TED Radio Hour from NPR. You can subscribe to the TED Radio Hour on TuneIn.
Capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg Radio.
It is 3 p.m. on Wall Street. I'm Doug Krisner, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Final hour of trading is now underway for this Wednesday, November 13th. A mixed picture in equities right now, and the stock market is well off best levels of the day on a report of a snag in U.S.-China trade talks. Earlier, Dow Jones was reporting China is leery of putting a numerical commitment on an agreement to buy more U.S. agricultural goods. Earlier in the day, Fed Chair Jay Powell said the current stance on monetary policy is likely to be sufficient, provided, here's the caveat, the American economy stays on track. He did, to be fair, warn of noteworthy risk remaining. The reading on October retail inflation kind of mixed. Headline CPI was above forecast, a little hot there, but the core rate was short of consensus when you look at it on a year-over-year basis, and then month-over-month, it was right in line with forecast. Right now in the equity market, Dow Industrial Average holding on to a gain of 0.4%, S&P 500 up 0.1%, although the NASDAQ Composite down from a record high by 0.1%. What a rally in shares of Disney. The company's new streaming service attracted 10 million customers. Disney called it remarkable. Stock is up 7%. Flip side, I guess you could say, look at Netflix. Those shares down 2.5%. The education software company Instructure is exploring strategic options, including a possible sale. Those shares are up nearly 6%. Canada Goose Holdings down 10% at this hour. The company said unrest in Hong Kong, one of the reasons that business in Asia is hurting. Nike shares up 2%. The company is breaking up with Amazon. The athletic brand will stop selling sneakers and apparel directly on Amazon's website. For its part, Amazon is down 1.4%. In the bond market right now, U.S. 10-year Treasury giving back about 6 basis points in yield. We are now at 1.87%. The dollar firm against the majors, with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index higher by 0.1%. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, it's time to do a little Business Week economics, a special edition in many ways. I'm Jason Kelly. I'm in downtown Manhattan at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. It's a summit on security, and part of what we think about when we think about security is money. Candidly, that's been a key theme here, and it's a special edition of Business Week Economics in part because Kathleen Hayes, she's joining us from the 960 studio in San Francisco, fresh off an interview with Fed President Mary Daly out there in the city by the Bay. Carl Riccadonna, he's closer to home, actually at home base in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. So, KH, I want to start with you. In fact, let's play a little bit of sound because I want to help you, or I want you to help me put it in perspective. Mary Daly talking about policy in a pretty good place.
We calibrate policy to make the baseline growth be sustainable and promoting our dual mandate goals of full employment and price stability. So the policy accommodation we've taken, which has been 3 rate cuts this year, has put policy stance in a very good place to make that baseline come out where we need it to, which is slightly above trend growth and continued move up in inflation to target and further progress on full employment. So I do think of that as the economy's in a good place.
Economy in a good place. So she sounds pretty comfortable there, Kathleen.
Yes, she does. And actually what I was trying very hard to get President Daley to focus in on, and I think she did to a certain extent, is, well, the Fed has paused. Is this a pause and you're waiting to see if you have to do more? So a pause in a rate cutting path? Or is this a pause like, well, here we are. Right. So we could go lower in rates, we could stay here, or go higher in rates. And I think it took a bit of questioning to get her to, if you look collectively at all the things she said, to answer that question. I think, yes, she and other Fed officials think they're in a good place. Jay Powell today, the Fed chair, say, that there's downside risk. Mary Daly said, yes, there are headwinds that could get worse. In fact, I asked her, when they keep talking about you need to see some material worsening. Well, what do you mean by that? And one of the things she did focus on was the fact that these headwinds could get worse again.
Right.
And we could see the uncertainty hitting business investment again. And we could see it not just filtering into manufacturing, but from manufacturing into consumer spending. So I think we did get something a little bit more specific from Mary Daly on what they're waiting to see. And as long as those things don't happen, they're going to stay where they are, but I would still submit to you that they're still at a point where, if anything, they realize if things get worse again, the rate cuts may not be over.
All right, so I want to listen to another cut because I want Carl Riccadonna to react to it, and it goes to that exact point that you're making, Kathleen, about it's sort of appropriate for right now. Here it is.
I see the level of the policy rate right now as appropriate for the economy we have, which is good consumer spending, good domestic momentum, but facing these headwinds, which have hurt business investment and manufacturing. So we are in a moderately accommodative stance, and that's appropriate.
All right, Carl Riccadonna, come on in here, Chief U.S. Economist for Bloomberg. What did you hear her say there? It sounds like comfortable for now.
It's comfortable for now, and the economy's in a good place so long as 2 things remain intact. One, trade tensions seem to be either on hold or in retreat. And number 2, consumers are on a firm footing. And there's some real questions about both of those. Obviously, as Doug Kirshner mentioned in the earlier segment, there were some Dow Jones headlines that started to raise some questions as to whether we're not seeing a repeat of prior rounds of trade talks breaking down, where China is backing away from promise for certain ag buys, and the U.S. is not ready to roll back tariff levels. And the last few times we saw this, then that actually resulted in more tariffs being implemented. So if we are at one of these points where suddenly the White House Twitter account says enough is enough, here comes the next round of tariffs, then that would be one of those items that would fall into the material change in the outlook that Kathleen referred to. The other thing she's highlighted was consumers being in a good place, and that certainly was the case over the last few quarters, but there's some real question marks looming over fourth quarter consumer spending. The sentiment figures are holding up. We saw credit card spending down 2 months in a row. If we look at the income trend, it's been decelerating over the last several months. And so these all raise some question marks as to whether consumers really are holding up in the fourth quarter. And the final thing I'll mention there is unit motor vehicle sales, which were out after the jobs report last Friday, and it kind of got lost in the shuffle. But vehicle sales significantly missed the mark. When households are starting to hesitate about big ticket purchases, that can often be a potential warning sign that they're going to pull back more broadly.
All right, so Kathleen, talk to me about inflation, because you can't have a conversation with a Fed president without bringing that up, right?
Well, and, there's two ways to think about inflation. Well, there's many ways. But when you're thinking of the Fed and what they're doing, one of them is, hey, you guys, you've still got inflation below target. And they did, I think, in the last, talking about what the Fed has done and talking about what concerns are, Powell, Mary Daly, others have mentioned, inflation's below target. That would be another reason for making that last rate cut. But on the other side of the coin, I think people are wondering, well, gee, if they pause, does that mean they're really ready to move in the other direction? I asked Mary about something she said that was so interesting recently, that she wants to see what low unemployment is experientially. Not just in terms of guessing at what that level is, that level where low unemployment boosts inflation, but actually seeing it in rising wages, seeing in rising price inflation. So I pushed her on that. And I think one of the things she said about inflation when I asked her, well, gee, do you have room to let it go, was this.
When we see the headwinds pushing growth below trend, when we still have yet to achieve our inflation target of 2%, and there still seems room to run in the labor market, then that's what monetary policy can and should offset.
So in other words, if she says that they can and should offset that, that's another thing that's got to be on the Fed's balance sheet of what we're going to do next. Even if the economy's in a good place, if they still see inflation below target. And Mary Daly also concerned if the inflation expectations should fall. She doesn't see it happening now. Seems to me, any kind of move towards even thinking about higher rates, even if the economy stays in this good spot, long way off.
And so, Carl, what do you make of that? I mean, the labor question, I feel like, has just been one of these bugaboos for years in this bull run. What do you make of that?
Absolutely. So this goes back to really the brilliance of Janet Yellen, who before her term was up as Fed chair said, there's potentially a scenario here where the neutral level of the unemployment rate is much lower than conventional wisdom would suggest. And so, we should consider not normalizing policy until we really see the whites of the eyes of inflation pressures picking up. There's a case to be made that maybe full employment is lower than even 4%. And at the time, people kind of reacted with a screech and said, she's lost her marble. She's an Uber dove. She's going to create hyperinflation, and hindsight 2020. She was very much on point in ascertaining that we were not at the cusp of a wage price spiral, and this is something that really set the tone for Jay Powell, and I think it opened his eyes to labor economics and the potential benefits of running the economy hot and boosting things like labor force participation, and that fixes a lot of structural problems in the economy, not just the Fed fulfilling its mandate. And I think Jay Powell is fully bought on to that notion. And even in today's remarks, while a lot of Fed officials have said they weren't in favor of the last rate cut and they're concerned about financial stability issues and whatnot, Jay Powell is really, I think, getting on board to the notion of let's see how far we can run this and really improve economic conditions for broad swaths of the economy, not just the upper income brackets that tend to benefit most in the earlier stages of economic cycles.
And no coincidence, perhaps, that Mary Daly has been working at the San Francisco Fed as an economist since 1996. She spent a long time working when Janet Yellen was head of the San Francisco Fed. Mary Daly, also expert in labor markets, productivity, all kinds of things that I think also support this. And again, Mary's just been San Francisco Fed president for over a year, but I think to me it's going to be interesting to see more and more how she makes her mark. Again, to me it was very interesting when she said, well, I don't just want to guess at that, U4 rate, what's that key unemployment rate where inflation starts rising when employment gets too low. She wants to actually see it. And I did, ask if this is going to change the Fed's reaction function. And I think she did say, rather, carefully that yes, it's something, the Fed listen, events and what they're learning, and that yes, this is making a difference. I didn't think she actually said yes, it's going to change the reaction function, but I think she, to me, was clearly saying yes, this is in the mix for us now.
Reading between the lines, it is changing the reaction function, and this is a big distinction from John Williams and the way he was orchestrating with the U star and the R star and all of these theoretical constructs of where we should be setting policy. And the Janet Yellens and Mary Daly seem to be saying let's refocus much more on applied economics and see what's happening in the real world and respond to that rather than respond to academic theory or an equation. And so in doing so, it does change the reaction function. And I would argue for the better.
So is this a more real-world Fed in general, do you think, Kathleen?
In general, well, maybe to an extent. I mean, this Fed, I love the diversity of the Fed. I love all these different Fed bank presidents and governors who bring different things to the table. I do think that this very basic thing that's happened, which is where, yes, given how things used to work, by now, with this level of unemployment, we should have higher wages and definitely higher inflation. The fact that it hasn't happened has tempered everybody's views.
I think it is a real world Fed. I think we hear that from Mary Daly. We hear it from Raphael Bostic when he spoke to the New York
well, that's what I was thinking about. Bostic certainly had that air about him, and was able to talk about that region of the country vis-a-vis other it was a very, and I remember talking about it on this program.
Yes,
that
he was
feels
really
like we're getting
stressing the anecdotal evidence that they're hearing from his district context.
Well, and Rob
so
Kaplan,
it goes to what's happening in the real world versus what should be happening in a textbook. So it is a real world Fed. We hear it from Raphael Bostic. We hear it from Mary Daly and Jay Powell, who, when he initially was being vetted for the role of Fed chair, there were a lot of folks that said he doesn't have a PhD in economics, so he's not qualified for this job. Well, some of the best Fed chairs in history, including Paul Volcker, did not have a PhD in economics. So, what we really need at the Fed at this critical moment, I think, is someone with real-world experience and private sector finance experience, and Jay Powell has that in spades, and that's a key reason why the Fed is avoiding a very enticing policy mistake, and that's negative interest rates, which have been disastrous in Europe. They work in theory, they don't work in the real world. Having a guy or a gal who understands how private sector finance works was critical to the Fed avoiding and steering clear of that type of mistake.
So it's interesting to think about, we've been conditioned to watch and listen so closely what the Fed chair says on Capitol Hill. Obviously, today, that was a bit overwhelmed, I think, a bit by something that's happening elsewhere in the Capitol, which is the kickoff to the impeachment hearings. Anything that jumped out at either of you, starting with you, Kathleen, that Chair Powell said?
Well, as I said, first of all, this fact that when he said that, one of the things we've learned is that unemployment can stay lower than we thought it could. I felt that a lot. I think once we got one thing, this is a big takeaway. What Jay Powell said at the press conference after the meeting on October 30th, when they cut the key rate and, then said didn't say we're pausing, but signaled they're pausing. And what he said today, I don't really see any change. I think that right now that the consensus at the Fed knows where it is. It knows why it is. I will say one of the things I tried to push Murray Daly on was a criticism that Charlie Plosser made, former president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, the evening that we interviewed him after the cut. And he said, hey, look, what about Fed communication? He said the Fed said the economy's in a good place. And then they cut the key rate. So how are we supposed to know what they're going to do next? I think it's a fair criticism, and I think Mary said, well, we're calibrating this, we're watching that. But because I think this is the question for the Fed now on that regard. So let's say in December, the economy looks like it's in a good place. On the other hand, trade, what are they going to do? How are we going to know if they're going to cut again? And Carl, you've been looking for that December rate cut. I think that's a fair criticism. What's the Fed's reaction function just right now when you're looking at consumer spending, jobs, trade war, etc.?
So the December reaction function is that if we were going through with tariffs that were scheduled to go into effect in October and more were going effect into December, if we look at just those two tranches of tariffs, they actually add up to more than all of the tariffs that were put into place last year. So we take those off the table, which seems to be the case if phase one is moving forward, and there's no need for a December rate cut. And so that's why today, there really wasn't a distinction between what Jay Powell said today versus what he said at his press conference. He had the opportunity to grab the steering wheel and head in a new direction. He chose not to. And so in response to that, it's very clear to us that they will not be cutting rates in December. And so we took the December rate cut off the table after he spoke.
Let me say quickly,
today.
but you're saying if we're in a trade mess again, you think there's a chance that if not December, they could cut again after the first of the year?
If we go back to the point where these tariffs are going to be levied, then the Fed is going to have to take out additional insurance.
All right. Great discussion. Great interview,
Fun
Kathleen.
stuff, you guys.
Thank you so much. Safe travels home. Kathleen Hayes, our guru, economics correspondent. So many things. Sitting down with Mary Daly there at the San Francisco Fed. She joined us from our 960 studio in San Francisco. Carl Riccadonna back home in New York City. Let's get some world national headlines now. For that, we go to Bob Moon.
Jason, House Intelligence Committee Republicans say there's no case against President Trump because Ukraine got its military aid, albeit delayed, and its president got out of making a public promise to investigate the Bidens. Those open impeachment hearings continue on Capitol Hill, and Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has the latest for us live.
Republican lawyer Steve Castor suggested to State Department official George Kent that President Trump was justified in regarding Ukraine as corrupt.
This is a country where those that commit crimes generally never get held to account.
Burisma starts adding officials to its board.
The most prominent person was the former president of Poland, Aleksander Kwaśniewski.
And anyone else?
There were a number of others, including some Americans, and the most prominent one in this context is Hunter Biden.
Was Hunter Biden a corporate governance expert?
Kent said he tried to caution the White House that Hunter Biden was creating a perception of conflict of interest, but Vice President Joe Biden was indeed boosting U.S. backing for Ukraine on 6 visits to that country, and Ukraine's new president deserves U.S. support. On Capitol Hill, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio. Bob.
Thanks, Irv. We're awaiting that joint news conference at the White House after President Trump's meeting with his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Going into their Oval Office talks, there was no concern over Turkey's invasion of Syria or its purchase of Russian missiles, but Trump said it's time to boost trade.
We think we can bring trade up very quickly to about $100 billion between our countries.
Again, that Trump-Erdogan news conference set to start any moment now. We'll bring it to you live. The other shoe is dropping over those deliberate outages that left millions of Californians powerless last month. California regulators have unanimously ordered an investigation into the decision by utilities to kill the power to avoid sparking wildfires during windy weather, with officials blaming botched planning and lack of leadership for causing serious hardship. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter. I'm Bob Moon. Doug Christner, over to you now for a market update.
Thank you, Bob. We've got the equity market under a little bit of pressure right now. Off session highs on a report of a snag in trade talks between the U.S. and China. Earlier, Dow Jones was reporting that China is now leery of putting a numerical commitment on an agreement to buy more U.S. farm goods. Now, you probably remember President Trump saying a while back that China had agreed to buy up to $50 billion worth of U.S. agricultural products annually. Earlier in the day, Fed Chair Jay Powell said the current stance on monetary policy at the Fed is likely to be sufficient, provided the economy remains on track. The reading on October retail inflation kind of mixed. Headline CPI a little above forecast. However, the core rate fell short of consensus on a year-over-year basis and just matched when you look at things month over month. Right now, Dow holding on to a gain of 0.4%, S&P 500 higher by 0.1%, the NASDAQ composite holding on to a very slim gain, less than 0.1%. We've got a rally in shares of Disney. Stock is up 7.6% on word the company's new video streaming platform attracted 10 million customers. Even Disney is calling it remarkable. Flip side, Netflix down 2.8%. The education software company Instructure is exploring strategic options, including a sale. Those shares are higher by 5.7%. U.S. 10-year Treasury down nearly 6 basis points in yield. Right now, at 1.87%. You're caught up on markets back to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Security Summit. Here's Jason Kelly.
Thank you so much. And you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Jason Kelly here in Lower Manhattan and bringing you a headline crossing the Bloomberg right now. It's about Peloton. Dave Wilson somewhere is rolling his eyes at me talking about Peloton, but I do love talking about this company. It's a stock we've watched. Carol Masser, my partner, and I talk often about this company. We spent some time over the years with John Foley, the CEO. And the headline is pretty simple. Peloton going to sell a couple new products next year, including a cheaper treadmill, cheaper than the current tread. That costs about $4,000. The current version does. Also looking into selling a rowing machine, capitalizing on the recent popularity of that modality, as they say in fitness. This is according to people familiar with the company's plans. The company, we should say, a spokeswoman, Jessica Kleiman, saying, quote, "Our R&D team is always working on ideas," not commenting specifically on those two ideas or those two products. Peloton, of course, is now a publicly traded company. We've looked at that pretty extensively here on this show. The stock up about 7.5% today. Let's see if part of it is based on some of that reporting. Yes, it is. It took a significant leg up on that story. That story, we should point out, written by Julie Verhage and Mark Gurman, a couple of our tech and fintech reporters. So again, Peloton looking into selling a lower price version of its treadmill. I will say, when I spoke with John Foley the day that the company went public down on the NASDAQ, it came up. I asked him because those rumors had been out there. He declined to say whether they were developing a rowing machine. I asked him about that specifically. He did say in the course of that conversation that we carried on Bloomberg Television and radio that rowing was indeed a very good and popular workout. So maybe reading a little bit between the lines. Dave Wilson is back in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. You love hearing me talk about Peloton, don't you, Dave?
Oh, yeah, I really do. I can't get enough, Jason. Oh, give me more.
I know, but it's such an interesting stock to watch. It's a product, obviously, of great interest to our listeners and viewers. And, this is the sort of thing, if you're thinking about the stock, that people are looking for, in part because the stock's still trading below, even with this pop, is still trading below its IPO price.
Absolutely. I mean, you haven't come out ahead yet. The $29 was the original price. Peloton at the moment trading around $26.52. So there's still some work to do in terms of actually being able to make profits if you were one of those investors who bought at the initial price.
Right. So talk to me a little bit about your chart of the day, if you can.
Sure, I can do that. I mean, if you think about defensive stocks, that sort of broad category, there are four areas really that are a focus. Utilities, real estate, the makers of consumer staples, food, beverage, tobacco. And by the way, we're talking about basically the three best performers out of the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500 today. So there's a clear defensive kind of an approach. And one that's kind of lost that reputation to some extent lately is healthcare. And it's an area that UBS revisited to looking ahead to 2020 and trying to figure out, what kind of strategy to take. And in particular, they looked at projected earnings for the healthcare group relative to utilities and found that, you'd have to go back decades to find a time that healthcare was cheaper in relative terms. I made the same comparison in the chart just looking at the S&P 500 groups, and indeed that's the case. We have data going back to 1990 on what are called forward price earnings ratios, so they're based on projected profit for the next 12 months. And just back in October, you saw the healthcare group at a 29% discount relative to utilities based on forward PE, and that's the biggest one in the history that we have. So it kind of bears out UBS's point, is that, if you're looking for defense, maybe this is an area to consider, given what's been happening to relative valuation. Anyway, if you want to know more, you can just send me an email. I will get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
All right, Dave Wilson. So I was robbed of my time with you at the top of the show. So tell me what's on your mind with the markets today. It's sort of an interesting trade. I mean, Disney obviously seems to be dominating a lot of the move upward. Disney Plus, man, whoa, as Carol Massar would say.
Up more than 7% Disney shares, and I did talk about it at the top of the show, Jason. So at least you're up to speed with what's going on there. And beyond that, what I was just saying a moment ago about sort of the defensive look to the market here really does kind of pop up, because it's a sort of thing that we saw quite a bit of earlier in the year, as there was the concern about where the economy might be headed here in the U.S. and elsewhere. And then lately, you got the idea that people were a bit more confident, and so therefore you saw a shift toward some of the more economically sensitive areas of the market, along with just the value stocks, the ones that tend to be relatively cheap. Today, we see bond yields going down, and we see the move back into what you would call the bond proxies. As I was saying, utilities, real estate, consumer staples, three best performers on the day in the S&P 500 out of their main groups. So, it's clear, at least for the moment, that, we've kind of gone back to the future here.
Right. And so, it's interesting, that whole sentiment play. I know we've been talking about this a fair amount over the last couple of days, but I'm fascinated by this idea of what a difference, call it a month makes, right? Or 6 weeks, that you have this near ebullience in the market now, or at least some optimism that didn't feel like it was there. I mean, is earnings largely responsible for that? What do you attribute it to?
Well, yeah, it may just be that people kind of figure that yields are going to stay down for a while. So, there's plenty to be gained by having your money in stocks as opposed to bonds. That, as much as we look around the world and we see negative yields kind of going away to some extent, it's not like you're really earning all that much in terms of income. So the whole idea that, you do have a consumer who's willing to buy. We see that in the case of Disney, that is for sure. And there are a couple of other smaller companies that had results out today that really kind of jumped out as well. Energizer Holdings, those shares up almost 14%. And Spectrum Brands, which is all kinds of consumer products.
Right.
Everything from Quickset locks to Foreman grills to Black Flag bug spray. That stock's up 17.5% in the wake of their results.
All right, Dave Wilson, we're going to leave it there. I love the fact that the President of the United States is running a little bit late, and that meant that I was not deprived of my time with you. So,
all righty then.
I appreciate it. Thank you, President Trump. All right, so we're going to move down to Washington now. Before we hear from President Trump and President Erdogan, let's get a preview from Ryan Teague Beckwith, political reporter for Bloomberg. He joins me on the phone from our nation's capital. So, very quiet day in Washington. Huh, Ryan?
Yeah, I have to say, this is a really odd choice for counter-programming on impeachment, because it reminds people of one of the decisions that Trump made that they didn't like, which was the, withdrawing troops from Syria and all of the things that happened after that involving Turkey.
And so, tell us more about the sort of contours in the context of this particular visit. President Erdogan, as you're alluding to, not necessarily the most popular guy in the world, certainly doesn't lack controversy in his leadership of that very important country.
Yeah, I mean, he even has controversy here. As you'll recall, in one of his previous visits to the United States, members of his security staff roughed up protesters in D.C., and people were very upset about that. This is one of those people that Trump just really likes personally, because he views him as a strong leader, and he is, clearly rewarding him by bringing him here and having him in a White House meeting. There was a chance here for some Republicans in the Senate to come in and be in the meeting as well. And Senator Lindsey Graham just said a few moments ago, the purpose of this meeting is to have an American civics lesson with our Turkish friends, and there's a pony in there somewhere if we can find it. If you may recall, that's the punchline to a popular joke about a child receiving a lot of manure for Christmas.
Yes,
so
indeed.
That's kind of telling. I think that comment alone from Lindsey Graham, who has been, one of President Trump's most stalwart defenders in recent days, phrasing the comment in that particular way is just a sign of just how unpopular this is, even within his own party.
Well, because as you were, I think, referring to Lindsey Graham while being just an unbelievably strong ally of the president in many ways, has also been highly critical of the decision around Syria, correct?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that Republicans will break with the president on. One is his support for tariffs, and the other is some of his foreign policy decisions. Those like Graham, who are very hawkish and believe that the best way to defeat ISIS and is to maintain a strong presence in Syria, we're not happy with that decision. We're not happy with how that decision was made. We're not happy with how it was carried out, and we're willing to criticize the president for that. And then, given that decision then led Turkey to move its troops into the area in take some very controversial moves, was just something that a lot of Republicans did not like, could not stomach.
Right, and we're very public about it in a way that they have not been public in criticizing the president about anything else.
They criticize him a lot behind closed doors or in anonymous comments to Hill newspapers and whatnot, but they came right out and said it in that case, and it wasn't just people like Mitt Romney. I mean, it was people like Lindsey Graham, who otherwise have his back. So it's just a very odd choice to do this on the day when he really needs full 100% support from Republicans on his side in order to sort of maintain the line here on this impeachment as a partisan effort.
And speaking of partisan efforts, I dare say, if you look up to Capitol Hill, obviously you had Fed Chair Jay Powell testifying. That was not the main show, though, on Capitol Hill. Certainly the first public impeachment hearings getting underway did capture a lot of attention. As you guys talk amongst yourselves there in the newsroom and talk to sources, what's the takeaway so far?
I mean, we know a lot of the outline of this. I mean, I think we've known of the outline of this from the start. I've said before that this is kind of the Columbo impeachment. And on the show Columbo, they would show the murder first, and then you would sort of watch to see how Columbo solved it, and whether the person got away with it. That's kind of what we've known from the start, that he was pressuring Ukraine to do this. It's in the transcript of the call, which he released right away. It's spelled out in the whistleblower complaint. All of the testimony has basically just corroborated parts of that story. Obviously, Republicans on the Hill are finding ways at poking holes in the testimony that came today. But I think that the two witnesses were very sober, very somber. I think that the fact that they started with the staff attorney doing the interviews was lent it an air of gravitas, for at least for the first hour or so. Before they got into kind of the snippy stuff, and meant that the questioning was much more focused. One of the things you find in congressional hearings these days is that they each have a minute, and it's all over the map. It's like looking at Twitter or something like that. Each person has something new to say. So the staff attorney was able to sort of really lay the case out. And so I don't know. Is it going to have an effect on the public? I don't know. That's not something that I can really judge. But certainly they did their best to put forward the facts.
And we'll hear more from Capitol Hill in terms of the impeachment hearings on Friday, I believe. Ryan Teague Beckwith, thank you so much for that preview. We are awaiting comments from President Trump and President Erdogan there at the White House in Washington, D.C. I want to bring you a headline just crossing the Bloomberg. Thermo Fisher set to a purchase of diagnostics firm QIAGEN. That is a Dutch company. I believe, if I'm reading that right, that's exactly right. It's listed in New York and Frankfurt. QIAGEN has a market value of about $7.3 billion. This is a scoop crossing the Bloomberg by Ed Hammond, Dinesh Nair, and Nabila Ahmed. More on that deal coming up. Well, let's move to a conversation here at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Summit on Security. Greg Virgin is here with me. He is the CEO at Red Jack, participating in the conference here. Greg, great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so tell us essentially, I was going to say, why are you here? But I know why you're here, because this is a really important series of conversations that's happening. What are you sort of taking away as the main themes here?
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation around, for what I talked about, vote security. And a lot of that had a lot to do with information online through social media and how we can trust information, and the concept that while there's plenty to be said about hacking a vote, there's, voter manipulation is also a problem.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because what seems to be coming clear, and I spoke with Craig Newmark earlier, and obviously he's done a lot of work in this area as well, and in several other conversations I've had on the sidelines and on air here, it becomes very clear that we need to be worried about the humans, not the technology, in some ways, and the manipulation of humans. So how does technology sort of help us do that?
Well, the way that I described this earlier is a lot of people coming at this from the cybersecurity side like to think in terms of malware. So you take a system and you hack into it and break it, or you socially engineer the people who run it. But the way that a lot of these systems online work, they've got inputs, which is what you've done in the past and what is trending online, and then they've got outputs. So if you want to exploit that system, you can exploit the system itself, or you could change the inputs. And I think that's one of the interesting things that we kind of have to contend with over the next decade.
Right. Well, and certainly over the next year, as we look toward a presidential election, what have we learned over the past couple years that we're now going to apply in this all-important, presidential election in 2020?
Yeah, this is a tough thing to really study.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the problems, is we need better ways to understand how, there are all sorts of fake news campaigns and like bots, these sorts of fake sources of information on social media. And, we know that's bad. We know that like a news article that tells a lie is wrong.
Right.
But what if there are hundreds of thousands of sources of information, and that can change that first news article that you see when you bring up your Facebook? So I think that first we need to be able to study that a little bit better. But for me, I'll be very intentionally getting my news from a bunch of different diverse sources to make sure that I'm not relying on like any one platform's way that they're curating information for me.
And essentially having to do some sort of human triangulation in some ways, sort of in your own mind. I do wonder, your background, keep me honest here, I believe you worked for the DOD, you sort of worked on the government side. Yeah. How do you sort of effectively make that transition and sort of take that knowledge and take it to the private sector?
I've been looking at...
It's a big question, I know.
Yeah, it sure is. I've been looking at internet scale data for 18 years. And, we talk a lot about these really acute problems. And I've been looking at the noise on the internet now for so long that it's just sort of like our immune systems, right? We're just immersed in these cybersecurity issues, and it's become a part of the DNA, right? I think that from my perspective, just helping people understand how the internet works. One of the interesting data points, which researchers found, like 25% of all of the hashtag I voted tweets around the last election were from fake. They were from robots.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, it's easy for us to focus on like intentional sources of fake news, but you think about that, like some hackers decided that they were going to manipulate a system that way, and we've kind of got to wrap our heads around the implications of that, where, you know, from my career doing cybersecurity, that phenomenon is not very strange.
Right.
But it's not the sort of thing that we're all going to be able to understand until people from my background try to explain it.
Well, and I'm so glad you said that, because part of it really is about explaining. You know, Jen Easterly, who's here at the conference, and I were talking earlier, and, you know, she's working on some projects related to essentially marrying the science with storytelling in a lot of ways, sort of helping people understand. How do you go about doing that? You know, because you have a lot of smart people, I would put myself in the category of being relatively smart, who do not understand fully, you know, sort of, and don't have any sense of or depth of knowledge that you do. But how do you explain it to someone who wants to understand and has good intentions of being genuinely curious about it?
Yeah, well, you know, I didn't go into computer science because I've got social skills. I think that as an industry, we need to figure that out.
Yeah.
You know, I studied biology and chemistry also, so I like to use analogies there.
Yeah.
We need to find real-world analogies that aren't just warfare.
Right.
Right? Because what this space looks like is like the ability to infiltrate, to exploit systems on the internet is like, it's relatively straightforward and low risk for adversaries to do that.
Yeah.
So it's calling it an attack doesn't exactly work.
Right.
You know, from the perspective of what I used to do, it makes a lot of sense. But, you know, the internet is just kind of a dirty place. You know, like I've got 3 little kids and they go to school and don't wash their hands.
Right.
That's a lot. That's really a better analogy.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I do feel like one of the things that I feel like has taken some resonance here is this idea of hygiene, right? You know, that we have to think about this to a level of, as you're alluding to, sort of cleanliness in a lot of ways, and having good habits in the same way that, you know, I'm guessing your kids are the same as mine, where you have to remind them to brush their teeth, which is a disgusting idea that you have to remind someone to brush their teeth. But here we are, we're parents, we understand this. And yet those are the sorts of things that we don't necessarily think about in a figurative sense in terms of how we operate in the virtual world.
Yeah, and I think another important concept is resilience.
Yeah.
So it's the idea that that's the way that reality works, and we need to do things in a survivable way, in ways that comply with regulations. You know, we need to be better at doing IT. We need to clean up the DNA and the backbone of how this stuff works. And, you know, security too. But really, I've been trying to shift, you know, the way that I'm doing business around that concept.
Right.
Resilience.
And so what does resilience sort of look like in practice?
Yeah. For companies, I think that what we've seen in the last couple of years is this trend toward destructive attacks, destructive breaches, right? Where for years and years it was like somebody stole your data again. But now we've seen more and more like big companies being down for days, weeks, longer.
Right.
And so we need to be able to survive that sort of an attack. I believe by being able to just stand up all of your infrastructure somewhere else, which means you really have to understand how it works.
Yeah. And it also sounds like you need sort of the buy-in beyond the IT department. For too long, these things have been seen as like, that's an IT problem, or that's a problem for the security guy, or that's a problem for like the tech guy who's going to fix my phone.
Yeah, well, and you know, another issue is when you go into even moderately sized environments, IT has become so complicated that people don't really understand how it works anymore, right? So much of this is our ability to understand it,
right,
to begin with. So okay, we need to make it resilient. How does it really work? We use a bunch of automated ways of doing that, but I think we can kind of apply that principle to individuals, right? Let's talk about how all of the stuff you use online really works. Right? Like a half an hour of that can help people really understand how to protect themselves.
Well, it's a great conversation to keep on having. Really grateful to you for spending some time with me. Greg Virgin, CEO over at Red Jag. He is part of the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Summit on Security here in Lower Manhattan. Thank you so much. Let's get to Bob Moon. He's got some world and national headlines. Hey, Bob.
Jason, he claimed today that he's too busy with his presidential duties to watch the first round of public impeachment hearings on Capitol Hill. But President Trump was quick to condemn Democrats for what he called the continuation of their witch hunt. Trump, by the way, had no events on his schedule until noon. He spoke to reporters as he began an Oval Office meeting with his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, amid serious strains between the two NATO allies. Despite outrage among U.S. lawmakers from both parties over Turkey's invasion of Syria and purchase of Russian missiles, Trump was glowing in his praise.
It's an honor to have the President and Mrs. Erdogan with us. And they're highly respected in their country and in the region. And we'll see what we can do. But the relationship that we've had is good.
We're awaiting a delayed news conference, a joint news conference between Trump and Erdogan. We'll bring it to you live when it happens. And while Trump met with Erdogan, the House Intelligence Committee heard from two diplomats with long involvement in Ukraine policy, linking Trump to the demand for a political investigation. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman reports from Capitol Hill.
Lawyer for committee Democrats Dan Goldman asked Deputy Assistant Secretary of State George Kent about the president's allegations that Vice President Joe Biden sought to quash a Ukrainian probe into the gas company that recruited his son Hunter for its board of directors.
To your knowledge, is there any factual basis to support those allegations?
None whatsoever.
To your knowledge, is there any factual basis that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election?
To my knowledge, there is no factual basis, no.
The diplomats depicted Ukraine as a young democracy struggling to ally itself with the West against its bullying neighbor, Russia. On Capitol Hill, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and TikTok on Twitter. I'm Bob Moon. Now, Doug Krisner has a market update.
Thanks, Bob. We're about 10 minutes away now from the closing bell. A mixed picture for stocks, and generally speaking, the equity market is off session highs. This on a report of a snag in trade talks between the U.S. and China. Dow Jones reporting that China is now leery of putting a numerical commitment to an agreement on China buying more U.S. farm products. The Dow holding on to a gain of 0.4%. The NASDAQ comp, though, off from a record high by 0.1%. And in the broader market, the S&P 500 better by 0.1%. We've got a rally in shares of Disney. Stock is up 7.6% at this hour. The company's new streaming video platform attracted 10 million customers. Even Disney called it remarkable. Netflix stock down 3.25%. In the bond market, U.S. 10-year Treasury down 5 basis points in yield. Last quoted in New York at a yield of 1.88%. Back to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Security Summit. Here's Jason Kelly.
Doug, thank you so much. I am Jason Kelly here in downtown Manhattan. And a nice segue from our last conversation with Greg Virgin to Craig Newmark. You probably know him as the guy who created Craigslist. Yep, he's that Craig. He's spending a lot of time in the philanthropic world right now, including talking about election security, and that is why he's here. Check out this conversation.
The country is facing an attack, particularly on the integrity of our elections. I feel that I can modestly help the people doing the real job of protecting our elections, which is the same as protecting our country. My contributions are modest, but somebody's got to do it.
And so how did you come to this? Because you've been very specific and focused, it feels like, in your philanthropy. You have identified, I believe, sort of 3 major areas. How did this become one of them?
Well, it came through the confluence of a number of paths. One is that I'm interested in cybersecurity, and yet our foreign and domestic adversaries are attacking voting systems using cybersecurity methods. There's also information warfare, where bad guys are using so-called influence operations, or maybe just call them dirty tricks, to attack elections, to attack voting rights, that kind of thing. And finally, in my interest in journalism and related ethics, a lot of what the bad guys are doing are trying to paralyze our country by getting disinformation like conspiracy theories into mainstream news. And one of the worst effects of that is to get Americans angry at each other for no real reason. These are ways that our foreign adversaries and their domestic allies are hurting the country and hurting our elections.
What was if there was a moment, what was the aha moment for you? What did you see out there? Was there a certain action? Was there a certain election? What was it?
Well, in recent times, it was the 2016 election. But as I think more and more about my motivations, I think about my high school U.S. history teacher, Mr. Shulsky, 50 years ago, telling us of the importance of the free press and protecting the Bill of Rights as amended. Prior to that, in Sunday school, Mr. and Mrs. Levin saying that bearing false witness is bad and that we should strive to prevent that. That sounds a little bit Pollyanna, but those are my motivations, speaking as a nerd, a guy who takes things literally.
Right. Well, and you have very much embraced your nerddom over the years, and clearly that led you to be, I don't think it's hyperbole to say, one of the most influential people in really creating the modern internet, or certainly the way that we use it. What have you seen in terms of the unintended consequences, I guess?
I've seen a lot of good people connecting for the common good, but then I've also seen a very small number of people working together to hurt other people. In the beginning of the net, we didn't prepare well to handle the bad guys. We're learning how to do that now. We're learning how to make the internet a much more resilient place.
And when you think about what is working in terms of solving those goals, you're funding a lot of those efforts. What is working?
Well, what's beginning to work is that people doing good work, solving pieces of the entire puzzle, they're making progress with those pieces, but people like me are getting the people who are so far isolated, getting people to talk with each other, to combine their efforts. That's maybe the biggest single thing I'm doing. I'm getting to talk with each other. I'm getting to alert the public of what's going on. And, because I've been lucky and been privileged, I can write some checks to help the good guys work together to defeat the bad guys.
So one of the interesting things, Craig, is this intersection of your work around journalism and around election security. What is that nexus?
Well, the immediate nexus is two-part. One is that bad guys, foreign adversaries and their domestic allies, have figured out how to game the refs, meaning they figured out how to introduce disinformation and generally phony news such that American citizens don't get the information they need to make smart decisions. Meanwhile, they're also using cybersecurity techniques to attack our voting systems, possibly in subtle ways. For example, they're working with their domestic allies to purge voters who shouldn't be purged. What's worse is we fear that they might do things like taking a legitimate election registration record, tinkering with it, such that when the person goes to vote, they have to file a provisional ballot. And if a bunch of people do that, that slows down the line a lot. The thing is, we know that's a thing, and that's a thing that can be prevented, and people like me work with the people who do the actual operations. Again, my contributions are small. I get people to talk to each other and help out. That's not a big thing in itself, but a nerd's got to do what a nerd's got to do.
And that is the self-described nerd, founder of Craigslist, Craig Newmark himself, spending most of his time on his philanthropic efforts around election security, supporting independent and fair journalism as well. I caught up with him here at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum Summit on Security. More from here in Lower Manhattan. Also awaiting comments from President Trump and President Erdogan down in Washington. It's an exciting, fun-filled news day here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Jason Kelly. This is Bloomberg.
If you're planning on driving this weekend, expect delays on the A406 North Circular Road. There'll be road closures between Edmonton and Tottenham from 10 p.m. on Friday the 15th of November to 5 a.m. on Monday the 18th of November, while we carry out essential maintenance and repairs. All roads in the surrounding area will be extremely busy, so please allow more time for your journey and expect delays in the area. Plan ahead and check alternative routes at tfl.gov.uk. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Dad, can I get your opinion on something?
Yes, of course.
Dad, I just wanted to bend your ear.
Sure.
Dad, can I ask you a question?
How can I help?
At McDonald's, we know there's no substitute for experience. That's why we value the life skills people over 60 bring to our restaurants. To find out more about joining us, search McDonald's Jobs. Role models. Made at McDonald's.
Hey NFL fans, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you have unlimited access to every team and every game in the league. Listen live as it happens or on demand. Anytime, anywhere. All season long. Search NFL today. College football is live on TuneIn. Listen for free to games from more than 140 schools all season long.
To the 10, all the way to the checkerboard. Somebody stays on his feet and scores us down.
The top of the Big 12 is at stake. Reigning champion Oklahoma travels to Waco, Texas to take on the surprising undefeated Baylor Bears. The action kicks off this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Listen to every call and every game of your school all season long for free on TuneIn. Just search college to listen today.
We can't make traffic move faster during rush hour. But we can help you catch up on the news with TuneIn. With live around-the-clock news from MSNBC.
In the UK, they're significantly worse. When the president gets up to the podium...
CNBC and Fox News Talk.
The Fox News poll sizing up the race for 2020 found that each of the 5 top Democrats...
You can use your stop and go for good by staying in touch with the world. Search news to hear what's happening now.
The puck drops. 12 players face off to win. The suspense is pure torture, but you wouldn't miss this for the world. TuneIn brings you every minute of the NHL season. Listen live to hockey when it matters most on TuneIn.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg Radio. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
There you have it, sound of the closing bell for this Wednesday, November 13th. A mixed session for U.S. equities, although there were records for both the Dow and the S&P. However, the NASDAQ composite slipped from an all-time high. You know, the market was really down today from session highs on a report of a snag in U.S.-China trade talks. Earlier in the day, Dow Jones reported that China is now leery of putting a numerical commitment on an agreement to buy more U.S. farm products. The reading on October retail inflation kind of mixed. Headline CPI a little hot, coming in above forecast. However, the core rate was below the consensus when measured on a year-over-year basis. And if you look at it month over month, it was right in line with forecast. Long-term interest rates fell today, with U.S. 10-year Treasury losing more than 5 basis points, last quoted in New York at a yield of 1.88%. For the Dow Industrial Average, a gain of 0.3% to a record 27,782. S&P 500 at an all-time high 3,093 with a gain of about 0.1%. NASDAQ composite is down about 0.1% on the day, down from yesterday's record. We're going to need a few moments for these numbers to kind of settle before we can get an accurate picture. We have a rally in shares of Disney today, up by 7.3%. The company's new video streaming platform attracted 10 million customers. Even Disney called it remarkable. Stock up 7.5%. On the other hand, Netflix today down by 7%. Canada Goose Holdings down 11%. The company said there are difficulties in Asia, not the least of which unrest in Hong Kong. The education software company Instructure is exploring strategic options, including a possible sale. Those shares were up about 5% today. And Peloton gaining on reports of possibly the introduction of new equipment. Stock was up 5%. Dollar strength with the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index higher by 0.1%. I'm Doug Krisner. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash.
Your next move will be your last.
Nobody move a muscle.
Damn, Sippy, you got to move.
And I'm moving on from town to town.
Time is money. Let's go. Come on, move it.
Shake it up. Shake it up.
Bloomberg Business Week, Movers and Shakers, with Carol Mazur and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
And you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. And as we await comments from President Trump and President Erdogan, let's go straight to Dave Wilson and his stock of the day. Hi, Dave. What you got?
I've got Advanced Emission Solutions, Jason. It's a company that provides refined coal for power plants that's designed to reduce pollution. They also make carbon filters for water treatment. The ticker on this stock is ADES. It plunged 74% in 2014, 2015 as the company dealt with accounting issues. They were resolved in 2016. Now, the stock's been rebounding since then, even this year, as waning demand for coal led to some bankruptcies in the industry. Through the first 9 months of 2019, it climbed 41%. Now that gain is almost gone. Disappointing third quarter results largely explain why. Advanced Emissions profit and revenue were far below estimates by H.C. Wainwright's Amit Dayal, the only analyst to provide numbers in a Bloomberg survey. The company cited waning demand as utilities close coal-fired power plants. The results sent Advanced Emissions shares down as much as 27%. They closed with a loss of about 14%, and that was the biggest since February 2016.
Dave Wilson, thank you so much for that terrific stock and earlier your chart and all your market context. We'll catch up with you tomorrow. Let's take a look at what the S&P did today as we go a level down. 254 names up, 246 down. Pretty even split there. 5 unchanged. Your biggest gainer, it was Disney. You heard Doug Krisner talk about it. Those numbers coming in, more than 10 million people subscribing to Disney Plus, clearly loving The Mandalorian. That, of course, the Star Wars series that was one of the big draws for the new Disney Plus service. That stock going up, Netflix going down. So the streaming wars are underway. Dave, I said goodbye to you, but I can't ever quit you. There you are. What do you make of the trade today?
I know, Jason. It's so hard. What can I say?
It's your great taste in music.
Yeah, whatever. In any case, I mean, Disney being a stock in the Dow Industrials, you can't help but think about Nike, another company in that index. Now, for the last couple of years, they've been selling products directly through Amazon.com. Nike has decided to cut off that relationship. So it may signal that they want to do more on their own. Maybe it's a benefit for the retailers that currently buy products from them, like Foot Locker. But however it shakes out, it's clear there's change coming. I mean, they're bringing in the former CEO of eBay, John Donahoe, to run the company. So maybe that's part of it, too. Put it all together, though, and it's looking like a plus, at least in the eyes of investors. Nike shares up 2%.
Yeah, it's interesting, that reaction. You would think that, given the power of Amazon, that sort of divorcing from that sort of relationship might lead to some skepticism. But it does feel like, and Carol and I were able to catch up with John Donahoe just last week, or the week before last, ahead of our visit to Stanford. Clearly he is a guy who has a lot of enthusiasm around his ascension there at Nike, and we'll see where that goes. That is a company that has certainly run into some issues. Some headlines crossing right now about Cisco that I want to bring bring you. Seeing second quarter revenue down 3% to 5%. The estimate there had been for revenue up 2.68%. The company's seeing second quarter adjusted EPS 75 cents to 77 cents. The estimate had been for 79 cents. Let's see what the stock is doing. It is not surprisingly down about 5%, a little less than 5% right now in the aftermarket. So we're watching Cisco move. Also looking at President Trump there in Washington, picking up that press conference.
And there's another headline real quickly, Jason. Edison International reaching a $360 million settlement and a couple of wildfires. Shares are up in late trading.
There you go. Let's go to Washington. Thank you so much, Dave Wilson. Donald Trump.
Wonderful and very productive meeting. Before we start, I would like to thank President Erdogan for releasing detainee Serkan Golge, who was in detention and different forms of detention, and I appreciate that very much. That was a very nice tribute, and he'll be coming back at some point in the not-too-distant future. So that's very good news for the United States and also very good news for Turkey. Turkey, as everyone knows, is a great NATO ally and a strategic partner of the United States around the world. Our economic relationship has tremendous potential and continues to expand and to grow. Direct engagement and diplomacy between our nations are essential to ensuring a future of peace and prosperity and promise for our citizens. Over the course of the day, President Erdogan and I had a frank and productive conversation on a range of very important topics. Among those topics we discussed was the situation in Syria. Last month I sent Vice President Pence, Secretary of State Pompeo is with us, National Security Advisor O'Brien, thank you, to meet with President Erdogan in the hopes of ending all of the hostilities. The negotiations were very successful, and the United States and Turkey achieved a tremendous amount on that day, and I think we're working toward getting it better and better. It's a complicated situation. It's been going on for hundreds of years. Today, the ceasefire continues to hold, and I want to thank the President for his partnership and cooperation as we work to build a more stable and peaceful and prosperous Middle East. We've assured each other that Turkey will continue to uphold what it's supposed to uphold. I'm a big fan of the President, I have to tell you that. And I know that the ceasefire, while complicated, is moving forward and moving forward at a very rapid clip. There's a lot of people that want to see that work after so many decades and so many centuries, you might say. The United States and Turkey are working extensively on many other security issues. Turkey has the second largest armed forces in NATO after the United States, and they're a very strong second, I might add. And I'm pleased that Turkey has been steadily increasing its defense spending and is very close to the 2% of GDP range, unlike many of the other countries. At this moment, there are 8 out of the 28 countries that are current in terms of their obligation financially. Turkey has made a vital contribution to NATO's resolute support mission in Afghanistan, and its partnership was important to our destruction of the ISIS caliphate. In fact, just recently when we took out al-Baghdadi and take him out, we did. Turkey knew that we were going over certain areas. They were very, very helpful. We appreciate that very much. Good for both countries. We really appreciate it. We're grateful to President Erdogan and to the citizens of Turkey for their cooperation in the constant struggle against terrorism. He fights it like we do. Key to our security collaboration is our trade, defense, and military equipment program. American foreign military sales to Turkey total many billions of dollars, and Turkey supplies component parts to many American defense programs. They make parts of the frame, as an example, for the F-35. Turkey's acquisition of sophisticated Russian military equipment, such as the S-400, creates some very serious challenges for us. And we are talking about it constantly. We talked about it today. We're talking about it in the future. Hopefully we'll be able to resolve that situation. We've asked our Secretary of State and Minister of Foreign Affairs and our respective national security advisors to immediately work on resolving the S-400 issue. We've also recently agreed to work toward a $100 billion two-way trade agreement. Secretary Ross is here, and I think we've made tremendous progress in that. We have a lot of trade with Turkey, but it could be many times larger, and Turkey would like to see that, and it would also be good for the United States. So we intend to bring it up to about $100 billion. That would be 4 times what it is right now. Our goal is to expand commerce between the United States and Turkey, reduce our trade deficit, and ensure a truly fair and reciprocal relationship. We are, just for those of you that have any interest, we discussed it today also. Our trade agreement with China is moving along very rapidly. We'll see what happens, but it's moving along rapidly. China wants to make a deal, that I can tell you. One of my chief priorities as president has been removing the barriers to American trade and investment and ending the illicit practices that harm our workers. We encourage Turkey to further open its markets, and they are doing that. They are doing that. They're very much toward American goods and American services. Our markets are open. Turkey is opening up their markets, and they're opening up rapidly. Mr. President, as we have seen in recent weeks, the U.S.-Turkish alliance can be a powerful force for security and stability, not only in the Middle East, but beyond. I look forward to working with you and to your representatives. I want to thank you very much all for being here. I've gotten to become very familiar with all of you, and I really appreciate you doing a fantastic job for the people of Turkey. And I look forward to continuing to find a common ground, harness common purpose, and to advance the vital interests of our people and the abiding friendship between our nations. We have a great relationship, both personally and with the great country of Turkey, and we look forward to moving that forward and making it an even bigger and better relationship. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sayın Başkan, değerli dostum,
Mr. President, my dear friend,
saygıdeğer bakanlar, kıymetli basın mensupları, sizleri şahsım, heyetim ve milletim adına en kalbi duygularımla selamlıyorum. Öncelikle değerli dostum Başkan Trump'a ve kıymetli eşlerine misafirperverlikleri için teşekkür ederim. Bugün Sayın Başkan'la gündemimizde yer alan konulara ilişkin kapsamlı ve samimi görüşmeler kaydetti. Türk-Amerikan ilişkilerinin güçlü ve sağlıklı bir zeminde ilerletilmesi, işbirliğimizin derinleştirilmesi konularında hemfikiriz. Köklü müttefiklik bağımıza uygun bir şekilde ilişkilerimizde yeni bir sayfa açmakta kararlıyız. Sayın Başkan'la milli güvenliğimizi tehdit eden terör oluşumlarıyla mücadele konusunda karşılıklı irademizi teyit DAEŞ'e karşı ortak mücadelemizin sürdürülmesinin önemine değindik. Bilindiği gibi özellikle Bağdadi'nin ölümünden sonraki süreçte de bizler gerek cezaevlerinden Suriye tarafında kaçmaya çalışan, gerek ülkemizde şu anda 2200 civarında DAEŞ'te elimizde tutuklu veya mahkum. Türkiye 9 Ekim'de başlattığı Barış Pınarı Harekatı'yla terörle mücadelede yeni ve önemli bir adım atmıştır. Ülkemiz bu harekatla
PKK blew a very significant impact upon the separatist agenda of terrorist organizations such as PKK and YPG in Syria.
Yakaladığımızı düşünüyoruz.
In order to further strengthen our cooperation in Syria, we believe we have gained a significant momentum with our October 17th agreement or memorandum. But in order to harm this memorandum, PKK and YPG are attacking our soldiers and the civilians in a very provocative fashion. And in the last 24 hours, more than 19 attacks and harassing shots took place. And at the beginning of this month, in Tel Abyad, a bomb was placed, an explosive device was placed in outdoor market, and as a result of the explosion, 13 civilian lives were lost. Despite all of these developments, in order to settle the conflict in Syria in a sustained fashion, we are reiterating our commitment to our memorandum, our agreement with the United States. But some circles who are empathetic towards these terrorist organizations are feeling deeply upset, they are deeply disturbed, and they are using this information in order to cloud the understanding of the public opinion and that perception with the eventual gain or goal of harming our relations. And some historical developments and allegations are being used in order to dynamite our reciprocal and bilateral relations. Especially in the House of Representatives, some of the resolutions that were passed on October 29th served this very purpose, hurt deeply the Turkish nation, and they have a potential of casting a deep shadow over our bilateral relations. And I shared this information with Mr. President. The decision makers in an incident that took place about 104 years ago should not be politicians, but historians. We have nothing to hide, and we have a full self-esteem in that regard. But I need to state very clearly that we are, as Turkey, on the side of dialogue and open discussion and debate. And we have voiced our proposals to the Armenian party to open the archives reciprocally and establish a history commission. I believe the Senate will take the United States out of this vicious cycle which happened as a result of the resolution of the House of Representatives. Turkey and the United States stand side by side in order to fully eradicate Daesh and in order to bring peace and stability to Syria once and for all. And for this purpose, we should keep on working together. Turkey remains, or it should be, the most reliable partner of the United States in this region to achieve these targets. We are the only NATO ally, as Turkey, who has fought Daesh in a very resolved fashion. And until so far, we have detained 7,680 foreign fighters, and we have sent them back to their countries of origin. And we have banned entry to 77,000 individuals who are considered to be affiliated with Daesh terrorist organization. And right now in our prisons, a total of 1,216 Daesh members are incarcerated, coming from 40 different countries. We have quite recently detained 287 individuals, including women and children, who have fled the prisons that PKK and YPG used to control. Our country is being showcased as a target, and this terrorist organization caused 304 Turkish citizens to die, and against which we are going to keep on fighting. And it's very important to understand that the foreign fighters should be accepted by the countries of origin. And we have the same understanding with President Trump in order to convince the countries of origin to do this. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have a borderline of 911 kilometers with Syria. And when the war broke out 9 years ago, we were the ones at the forefront impacted heavily, and maybe the most. Currently, we have 3,650,000 Syrian refugees and a total of more than 4 million refugees. And we have spent about $40 billion, even beyond that, for these refugees in our country. And until so far, Europe only sent 3 billion euros despite a higher pledge through our NGOs. And similarly, we are providing sustained humanitarian aid to more than 3 million people living on the Syrian territory. Back in the year 2015, At the G20 Antalya summit, I launched an appeal in order to establish a safe zone in Syria. But because of the delay, tens of thousands of civilian lives were lost. This problem cannot continue forever and ever. Previously, with our Operation Euphrates Shield and Operation Olive Branch, we have managed to clear an area of 4,000 square kilometers of terrorist presence. And I agree with the proposals of the President. It's very important to realize our goals. I said Operation Euphrates Shield and Operation Olive Branch, and through these operations, we've managed to repatriate 365,000 Syrians back to their motherlands, especially in Jarablus. And thanks to the Operation Peace Spring, we have secured many towns and many villages, and the rightful settlers are going back. We have shared our projects with President Trump and our several plans for the safe zone, and with the support of the United Nations and international community, we can repatriate many more Syrian refugees in the northern part of Syria. We're talking about an area of 444 kilometers in length and 32 kilometers in depth. 1 million people can be repatriated, and in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, 1 million more individuals can be repatriated, so a total of 2 million refugees can be repatriated. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the Fethullahist terrorist organization known as FETÖ attempted to destroy the constitutional order of Turkey with a failed coup attempt, and it is a terrorist organization behind this failed coup. They have killed 251 individuals, harming 2,193 citizens, and they have even dared to bomb our parliament airborne. We have once again accentuated our expectations vis-a-vis our friends at the U.S. administration to once and for all eradicate FETÖ presence here. And we have also discussed with President Trump how to achieve the $100 billion trade volume threshold as soon as possible. We believe that we should not confuse political incidents with commerce-related aspirations. And our secretaries of commerce are currently heavily invested in achieving the $100 billion threshold. We hope and pray that we will shy away from certain measures which will make it much more challenging for us to reach these targets. And we have also quite naturally discussed our deeply rooted relations in the field of defense industry. Primarily the S-400 system and the F-35 program, we can only surmount the hurdles that we experience through dialogue. My dear friend previously stated back in Osaka at the G20 summit the injustice orchestrated against Turkey in terms of the acquisition of Patriot missiles. And we have clearly stated to President Trump that under suitable circumstances we could acquire Patriot missiles as well. As Turkey, we are ready and committed to sustain a very constructive dialogue with the United States Congress, and this is an idea that I've shared with President Trump as well. So with these thoughts in mind, I hope and pray that our discussions and deliberations all throughout the day with President Trump will yield the most auspicious results. I would like to take this opportunity to thank President Trump for their kind invitation and for being such gracious hosts all throughout the day. On behalf of my personal self, on behalf of my delegation, I would like to thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And I called up the Senate. I asked a couple of our senators, and we really ended up with 5, and others wanting to come, and we'll keep them apprised. But some of them joined us. They happen to be here. Senator Jim Risch, thank you, Jim, very much. Ted Cruz, thank you very much. Lindsey Graham, Lindsey, thank you. And Rick Scott, thank you, Rick, very much. Joni is here. Joni Ernst, someplace. These are people that want to see peace in the Middle East, and I thought it would be appropriate to have them come over. And they met with the president, and we had a lot of very frank discussion. And we're dealing with a very big subject, a complex subject. It's been going on for centuries in many cases, but we're making a lot of progress, tremendous progress in the Middle East. Okay, a couple of questions. Go ahead. OAN, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to just start out getting your general reaction today to the impeachment hearings on the Hill. Do you feel that Democrats made their case, and how did you feel about the Republican performance?
Are you talking about the witch hunt? Is that what you mean? Is that what you're talking about? I hear it's a joke. I haven't watched for 1 minute because I've been with the president, which is much more important as far as I'm concerned. This is a sham and shouldn't be allowed. It was a situation that was caused by people that shouldn't have allowed it to happen. I want to find out who's the whistleblower, because the whistleblower gave a lot of very incorrect information, including my call with the president of Ukraine, which was a perfect call and highly appropriate. And he wrote something that was much different than the fact. I want to find out why why would he have presented that, when in fact all he had to do is check the call itself and he would have seen it. I'm going to be releasing, I think on Thursday, a second call, which actually was the first of the two. And you'll make a determination as to what you think there. But I've heard just a report. They said it's all third-hand information, nothing direct at all. It can't be direct because I never said it. And all they have to do is look very, very simply at the transcript. If you read the transcript, this was analyzed by great lawyers. This was analyzed by Greg Jarrett. It was analyzed by Mark Levin. It was analyzed by everybody. They said this statement that I made, the whole call that I made with the president of Ukraine, was a perfect one. So that this country gets put through that we have to waste this gentleman's time by even thinking about it, talking about it. I'd much rather focus on peace in the Middle East. And I hear that it's a hoax, and it's being played as a hoax. That's what I hear, but you'll have to tell me. Go ahead.
Then, if I may, on Syria and peace in the Middle East, President Erdogan talked about repatriating Syrian refugees back to their homeland. Have you had those discussions with European leaders, since there are so many Syrian?
No, I think that, frankly, Europe should be paying for this to a large extent. As of this moment, Turkey's been paying for most of it. I think the president was saying today they've spent over $40 billion on the cost of that. $40 billion. How much?
30 million.
40. That's what I said. Whatever. He spent a lot. Okay. They're throwing out all these different numbers. I heard it was $40 billion. How was that? 40 billion, correct? So $40 billion. And I've heard that number from others, and that's a lot. Europe has contributed about $3 billion, and a lot of these people would go all throughout Europe. I mean, it would be a devastating situation for Europe, because he's got 4 million people. He has a lot of Kurds, too, that they're helping and taking care of. So I have spoken to Europe about it. I think they should help us with ISIS, because many of them left France, and they left Germany, and they left UK. They left different countries. And these countries should help us, because if they ever did get released, which we won't be doing, but if they ever did get released, that's where they want to go. They want to go back to France and Germany and UK and all of those other countries that are not helping us. I gave them the option, would you like to have them back? And intelligently they said, no, thank you. But that's not right, and it's not fair. I can tell you also that Turkey captured when some escaped during the conflict, when they had the heavy shooting. And I mean, I think I know how they happened to escape, but it's one of those things. Doesn't matter, because Turkey captured everybody that escaped, plus an additional group. When we took over, when I became president, ISIS was rampant all over the Middle East. And as of about a month ago, I think, Lindsay, we can say that we have now 100% of the caliphate. They'll always try and grow, but they haven't been able to do that. And what we did last week with al-Baghdadi, who is the absolute founder, leader, set them back. We also got his number 2, and we have our sights on his number 3. So they're not going to be growing too fast. But I will say Turkey's been helping us a lot.
So with that, I also have a question for President Erdogan. With what you're calling a realignment along the northern Syria border, a lot of Christians in that region are feeling very vulnerable. Groups on the ground are saying that attacks on Christians have increased under this new policy. and that they're not feeling safe any longer. Can you guarantee that the Turkish government will also protect Christians in that region? In fact, there was an attack on an Armenian priest who died, he and his father, this week. ISIS is claiming responsibility.
Thank you. Thank you. On the contrary, Kaldani, Yazidi, and Christian minorities is an area where we're especially sensitive about, and we have certain different plans. Whether it be the ones remaining on the side of Syria, whose sanctuaries have been destroyed, whose churches had been destroyed, we'll see their sanctuaries getting revived, and their churches will be reconstructed so that they can go back and start praying there again. And these are the plans that we're making for them. As I said before, the Christian minorities, Aramaic, Christian Catholics, the Kaldani and Yazidi, the ones who are living on our side of the border have no problems whatsoever, but the ones remaining on the side of the Syrian territory will see their worshipping practices restored and revived in a special manner. They're receiving health care, they're receiving humanitarian aid in every aspect possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to pick somebody?
Evet. Hilal Hanım buyur.
A friendly person from Turkey, please. Friendly. Only friendly reporters. We like to see. There aren't too many of them around.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
You inherited the burden of Obama's flawed foreign policy, and one of those flaws was allying the U.S. with the U.S.-designated terrorist organization, the PKK, and its Syrian offshoot YPG. You're trying to mend the damage that it did to U.S.-Turkey relations. However, you also invited the ringleader of YPG to the White House, his codename Mazlum Kobani, and he is responsible for at least 18 terrorist attacks in Turkey, which caused the death of 164 soldiers and 48 civilians. So after today's meeting, do you still think of inviting him to the White House, which will be very offensive and hurtful for the Turkish public? Thank you.
Well, I had a very good talk with him. We had a very good recently, and we're working very closely together, and we're also working very closely together with your great president. And a lot of things are happening. A lot of very positive developments are happening. A lot of that is definition. What's your definition of the various groups within the Kurds? You call the Kurds, and then you have various groups, and some like them and some don't. But I think we've made a tremendous we've gained a tremendous amount of momentum and strength and knowledge over the last short period of time. So we'll see what happens. But I will say that the relationship with President Erdogan and Turkey has been outstanding. And, it's a major country with a tremendous military. They're one of our very big purchases of military equipment. They have the finest equipment in the world, which the United States makes. We make by far the best equipment in the world. Turkey understood that a long time ago. So I think a tremendous amount of progress is being made. Okay? Thank you very much. You could ask the President a question now. Same report. You sure you're a reporter? You don't work for Turkey with that question?
Okay. I would glad to. Sayın Cumhurbaşkanım, özellikle FETÖ mevzusu.
Mr. President, about FETÖ, we are not getting the best of news out of the United States. And the FETÖ office targeting Turkey is extensively invested in their daily works. But I can see certain traces that the U.S. government is ready to understand more about FETÖ. So my question is, how do you perceive the situation developing vis-a-vis the Fethullahist terrorist organization and the American approach to FETÖ in that regard? Can we expect anything further? Yes. Thank you. During this current visit, we are going to submit, as we already have actually, a great deal of documents and evidence. And FETÖ is a terrorist organization, and he is the leader, the ringleader of this terrorist organization. They have killed 251 people in Turkey. They tried to